Before I jump into the solution here, we got an excellent question on chat about how do I use controllers. So the backstory here is that there was a period of time where controllers were basically used as arbitrary singletons within an Ember app. And there were massive problems that had to do with state management, the very thing that we're working on right now, particularly when you didn't keep track of which controller was active versus a controller that wasn't active. So if you could, it was possible to have like an inactive controller that was maybe listening to things that where it shouldn't have been in charge, essentially. So they were just used as arbitrary singletons. And there was a lot of kind of pushback from experienced developers and the core team that controllers should be de-emphasized and complexity should live in components. And when it comes to state, that is absolutely still true. That is totally true. The challenge here is some things don't exist on components yet. And so we must use controllers for certain things, and it's completely okay to use them for certain things. Those are dealing with query params, because controllers own the query param values, right? If you need to get that value, ultimately it either is going to be there or it's going to automatically bubble up to the route, but the mechanism by which it gets to the route, you don't have a whole lot of control over it. So if we want to put a debounce in place, there's no easy way to do that with the standard way that a query param would make it to the route. All you would do in the route is you'd basically see that the model hook in your route is called again, and the value of your query param is there in the params object, in that first argument passed to the model hook. So I still like to use controllers for query params. I still believe in using controllers for certain types of actions. I try to never have the controller own state other than the query params. So my controllers are very small relative to the older pattern, the older way of doing things. The controllers basically just have query params and a couple actions, and potentially you might want to inject a service there to make that service available to a template, but not much else really, not much else. I would even say using a setup controller hook like we have to kind of put location data. Remember we took data :location and data :request, grab these things off of a container and put them on the controller. That might even be crossing a little bit of a line here and saying, well, you might want to just have that live on the controller so that every time you enter, you're not resetting that state over and over again. You might want this controller to just get lazily instantiated, like it's going to be, and maybe represent that as a computed property with no dependencies. So it'll just get evaluated the first time, and then it's just sitting there cached, forever. But the way we're going to use controllers in my solution here, it is completely, I'm not going to say endorsed. No experienced Ember developer would object to this use of controllers. It doesn't touch on any of the dangerous things that were the motivation for emphasizing components over controllers. And the reason we emphasize components is because if you store state there, they are not singletons. Components are torn down and rebuilt up basically whenever you leave a route and come back, leave a route to go somewhere different and then come back, you're going to get a brand new instance of a component there. And so all of that state is essentially destroyed and made available for garbage collection, and then you get a nice clean start as you come back. Controllers, they are created the first time you need them, and then they're around until you tear the whole app down. And so this is why, singleton state is like a messy thing, and you want to avoid it if you can. So just a moment here. I realized I forgot this.
They're also asking if you can touch on route action as well.
Route action. So the route action helper is an Ember add-on that makes it possible to send what's called a closure action. This is a new type of action and we're only going to be using closure actions today, but this modern way of using actions does not end up bubbling up, to the controller and up to the route, the way, these older actions used to. And I will, rather than just do a bunch of hand gestures here, let me show you what I mean. So if we have an input tag like this, there used to be an older style of actions that would just look like this. And so here you see that we just have this action helper kind of floating around inside this tag. The reason we did this was because we were using handlebars instead of HTML bars. And there was really no way to know where exactly this piece of markup was inside the HTML. It was just string concatenation, right? We didn't really have a way of like saying, oh, this is an attribute and this is the tag name. So you could have it kind of floating wherever it needed to be, wherever you wanted it to be, and it wouldn't really affect anything. So the way I like to express this now in the more modern way would be like this. Something like that. And here, now we're binding to a W3C DOM event. We're binding to the key up event. And this is really important. This is a big improvement over the old way of doing things, because with the old way, inside the framework, we had to basically keep parity with all of the different types of events that could be fired. We had to have some sort of internal representation of those in the framework. This more modern way, which is only possible with HTML bars, and we've had this since Ember 1.10, now we have the ability to know the value, like this piece of handlebars markup is attached to this specific event. And this is because we're not just doing fancy string concatenation, which is what the core handlebars library does, but we're building up DOM fragments directly, and not just getting a big string and then inner HTML, and there you go. So the downside of this, right, this type of action would naturally just bubble up, like the controller would get a chance to respond, and the route would get a chance to respond, and then it would go to parent routes. You'd have this really nice chain of responsibility pattern. With this, you do not have that. And so the way that you basically get to have a route handle this action directly is by using this add-on, which essentially just, there's no magic here, it just goes and finds the currently active route and explicitly sends the action there instead of letting the framework do its normal thing. But a route action just looks like this. That's it. So this will like skip over the controller and go to the route. And what this gets you is the bubbling. This is how you can get directly from template to route without using controller. So good question, and I think we'll move on to the solution now. So what we want, just as a reminder here, we want to be able to type something into this search field, and we should see that it has some effect on this list of posts on the left side here. We should end up filtering for it. And we want to make sure that we're responding to a user event and being very deliberate about the ultimate consequence of that user event, rather than having data that updates by listening to other data. So that is the data down, actions up approach, as opposed to the data binding, the two-way data binding sloshing approach, which is a performance killer. Even if you're well organized, you're almost guaranteed to be hurt if you don't use data down, actions up. So here's how we're going to begin. I'm just going to start by opening the template for this markup that's on the left here, and it's posts.hbs. And I'm just going to create a little space here so we focus on what's important, and bump my font up a bit and create some space. So you'll notice that some people may be used to using the Ember input helper, which looks like this. It's almost looks like we just replaced the angle brackets with handlebars. I'm going to show you an approach that will make it unnecessary to use this input helper. And this is a good approach to take because you want to be able to bind to native DOM elements. If Chrome ships with some fancy new tag and you want to be able to use it, you don't want to have to wait for the framework to catch up. We want to rest directly on the web standards and to use the things that the browser ships with and to be compatible with them. So what we're going to do is we're going we're going to do something to this tag that gives us what we need. And it comes in two pieces. The first is we want to set the initial value of the search field. And we're going to do that the way you would do it if you had a string literal. Value equals search. I haven't set up my query param yet, but this is the first piece. So now, as I go to set my query param up, I should see that this will update if I give it an initial value of some sort. So we'll come back here to this template in a sec, but I'm going to go to the appropriate route for this so that I can set up my query param options. And that's going to be routes posts.js. So here we're going to begin by just defining the options here. So we're going to write query params. And the key here is like the name of the query param. So we'll just call it search. And just to make it fancy, I'm going to make it so we only represent this with one character in our browser URL, like this. And I don't want a new history state every time I type a key, every time this property gets updated. So I'm going to make sure I use replace true. So now what we should see, if we unscroll this, is as we start typing, we should see a new thing pop up in the URL, this new query param. Oh, let me open my console here. I may have a bug of some sort. There we go. Let's see, posts. Make sure we're running here. Let's try with the string literal just for fun. It's possible I have some.
Your CSS is white for that. I had to fix that in mine.
Okay, so I'm going to fix this real quick using a Chrome trick where you can add a CSS rule on the fly. So we're going to say input type search, and then color black. Great. So that should stick with us for a little bit. I'll fix it in my CSS in a moment. OK, so there's our initial value, and we can type. Great. And I'm going to just change it in the style sheet, actually, because I will be refreshing in a moment. Wonderful. So now let's wire it up to the query param itself. And what we should see is that if we do something like this, that should represent itself in here. So all we've done so far is we've set the initial value of this query param, right? Because this is just a regular DOM element. There is no two-way data binding support with this DOM element yet. So it's going to receive the initial value correctly, but we haven't put in place a mechanism to be notified of changes. So you'll see as I type this, you would normally see that the URL would update, and we do not see that yet. So the way we're going to do this is we need to hook up to a regular W3C DOM event. And what we want to happen is when this event fires, we want the value of search. This is this query param that the controller owns, that the posts controller owns. We want that to be updated to the new value held by this input element. We're going to do this using a template-only approach. We're not going to need any JavaScript for this action. So here's what we'll do. We're going to first start with the event that we need to bind to. And we'll bind to the input event. And on the right side, we're going to combine two helpers. We're going to first say action, because this is an action. We want to do something. And we're going to pass in the mute helper. So action, when used in combination with mute, is basically saying, I want to update the value of a property with something, right? So we're going to begin with the property we want to update, which is search. So this is going to say, I want to take, I want to update the value of search and currently what it would do is it would take that whole event object, right, which has a whole bunch of stuff attached to it, and it's going to set search equal to that. But there's an option available in the action helper that can kind of pluck off a subset of that object, and it'll use that, and it'll pass that to the action. It'll pass that to mute search. And the way we do that is we do, well, let me show you what happens first, just so you can see like what it looks like when you don't get this right. I'm going to hit a key, and you're going to see object event. So basically, this event has been stringified, and now the value of this query param is object event. And I bet it's in, yeah, so here it is up here in the URL as well. No good. So we're going to kind of pluck off a subset of this event, a piece on the inside, using the value option on the action helper. And you can use this whenever you're using action. And we're going to say, really what I want is like take this event thing and give me target, and within target give me value. And because it's addressable state, it's sticking here. So let's get rid of our query param. And now we can type A, B, C, D, E. I don't know if you can see the address bar here, but certainly our search field is behaving well, and I can tell you that A, B, C, D, E, it's updating in real time as we type in response to that event. So effectively, we have something that looks like two-way data binding, but we've just hooked up to an event and had to just set the initial value in the first place. So we gave it the value, and now we're informed of updates that this input component, this input web component is responsible for giving us. So this is a great way of like potentially weaning yourself off of the Ember input helper, which is, as you see, it's not really necessary, nor is text area. You can just use the regular DOM elements. And furthermore, it gets you into a good practice where you can start to listen to other things for which Ember does not have a built-in helper to give you, basically what we've just built in a convenience layer. We don't really need the convenience layer anymore. And we wrote no JavaScript for this. So just in summary, action in combination with mute lets you change a value, lets you set a value, and then the value here, the value option in the action helper lets you kind of, rather than get the whole event object passed to your action, it'll let you get a piece of that event object, or a piece of a piece in this case. So great, now we're updating the query param here. And what we really want to do though is, when this is updated, we kind of want to start some debouncing logic. So as much fun as it was to show you guys this, I want to replace it with something else. Like this here would be a nice two-way data binding approach. This would let you have like an input component that would work nicely. But we don't have the helpers we need in order to do the debouncing stuff right in the template here. So I'm going to just do on input, action, and we're going to have an action on our controller that's going to say search updated. And we're going to get our usual error saying could not find action. That's what we've got here. Search updated was not found on the auto-generated posts controller. So we're going to have to generate a controller here. Ember G controller posts. And there we go. And let's go controllers, posts, and we're just going to have actions, and there's search updated. And I'm going to keep that nice little thing we did, this value thing, because I don't really care about the rest of the event. And this will help hammer home that you should probably be using this. It's nicer to have it in the template than to have it in your JavaScript a bajillion times. So going back to the controller here, this is going to be the param val. And here's the approach that we're going to take. As you can see, with each keystroke, we are updating the value of this query param. Essentially, we have two-way data binding to get the URL up to date. But you'll notice that we didn't actually fetch new data on the left-hand side here. We didn't do anything with that query param yet. And so what what I have here is the URL is up to date at all times as soon as you press a key. But we're going to debounce the refreshing of the data so that that piece of it, and that's the important piece, that is data down, actions up. Because strangely enough, the URL itself is kind of foreign to Ember. So it is one of these things that, two-way data mining and an observer-like thing is appropriate there. And it's happening under the hood. We're not doing it deliberately. So what we're going to do here is we're going to say refresh route. We're going to have a private function here that's going to. Oh, do we have a question?
Yeah. Could you make this a route action, or would we not want the logic on the route?
So the issue with making it a route action is you wouldn't really have the ability to get the value of that. I guess you could get the value of the query param, and you could debounce in the route. To me, debouncing in a route seems kind of strange because it is beyond that route's responsibility. The route's job is to manage changes, manage transitions between states. Like the router is a finite state machine, and routes manage transitions between states. So it is possible to put it there. It would just feel in principle wrong to do it that way, simply because this is a response to a user event, and that is a controller-y thing. Controllers receive user input. Routes manage transitions between states. So it's possible. I have every reason to expect that it would work. And the reason is that you could just as easily pass the new value of that query param to the route as an argument to the action. I would not choose to do it that way, simply to keep roles and responsibilities in alignment with the design of these objects. So this is going to be, this function is going to end up actually telling the route to refresh. And what I'm going to do here, let's just bring in some stuff. I'm going to bring in debounce, get rid of this. So I'm going to say debounce. And you can see that what we pass into debounce is a method name. So we pass in a target and a method name, so we'll do it like this. And then the last thing is any arguments we wish to pass to this function, when it's eventually called, and we don't care about that. And then finally, we want to pass a millisecond value that tells us how much inactivity to wait for. So I'm just going to have 300 milliseconds there. So essentially, you're going to be able to type briskly, and only after a pause is detected will we see this action fire. And I can prove to you that it works. So we'll go over to the console here, clear it out, and we'll delete some stuff. Okay, something is not right here because I see I'm getting the same value. Let me just double check a couple things. Oh, you know what it is? We removed our older on input listener. So we're not updating search anymore. So it would be fine to do this. This will effectively do the same thing. Great, this appears to work now. So if I do A, B, C, D, E, and now only when I take a pause after E will you see something logged out to the console here. So we're debouncing now. We're kind of coalescing events together and only honoring the last event. So now what we want refresh route to do is we just want to do this dot send, which is going to fire an action that will bubble up to the route. And we'll just call this one refresh route as well. And now when we type, we're going to see a new error that's going to say, could not find this action. Nothing handled the action, refresh route. So we're going to go and handle the action up in the posts route. And all we're going to do in refresh route is we're going to do this refresh. And I'm going to leave us a little trace here so we can get ready for the next step. The first argument that's passed in here is params, right? So that is going to be any of your path params in dynamic segments that you've set up in your router, smashed together with all of your query params that this route is supposed to handle. So you could pass in params like this. I kind of like to do this. So this lets us just pluck one value that we care about off of the params object. It's using ES6 destructured assignment. But here you can basically, save a line of code below, and you can make it clear that this is what you're interested in inside params. Search equals search and save. And let's see what happens. Okay, so search is empty when I clear it out, and if I do ABC, we can see search equals ABC. All right, so now we've built a couple pieces here. We've got data down, actions up, meaning it's the keyboard event that is ultimately leading up to our refresh of the route. It is not two-way data binding that gets us here. And we can see that our model hook gets the appropriate value. So all that's left for us to do is now use that value in some way. So what we're going to do is we'll say if search is truthy, and this will work nicely for our empty string case as well. Empty string means we won't filter, so that'll be nice. So if search is truthy, we're going to use the query param, and otherwise we'll just do what we have been doing, which is going to be fetch all of the records without filtering. And the way we're going to filter here is we're going to do this store query, and we're going to pass in the type of record we're interested in, and then we're going to pass in query param values. And here we can use like the enhanced object literal ES6 feature and just do search, which of course is equal to like this, but we can abbreviate it like that. So I'll clear that out. Let's see, looks like something may have gone wrong.
You don't have any posts with ABC as the title?
I don't have any posts with ABC in the title. Looks like something might be right. So if I do SEV, something is strange here. Oh, there it goes. Maybe I had just deployed the API or something, and it took a minute to return a response. But here we've got SEV, and if we clear it out, we should see that the other post comes back. And if we search for RAB, we'll see it's finding that in rabbit hole. So now we have data down, actions up, use of the query param in a debounced way, right? So it's tempting to kind of use this option that's available on the query param, the route options for query params. Refresh model, right? Because in theory, then you just like bind to it and you bind that to an input and you just start typing. But it's not going to give you a nice experience like this, and it's going to pound the hell out of your API with literally every keystroke, every delete, every paste. You're going to be asking for a fresh set of new records. So this is the approach I advise taking for query params in Ember, and a nice example of some clean addressable state management. So I'm going to push this code to GitHub, and then we will move on to the next exercise. Does anyone have any questions before I do that? Questions about the approach, nitpicks with with the way I've done it? So I think the only kind of feedback I got was, does this stuff belong on the controller or the route? You could have put all of the controller-related stuff on the route. My preference is to do it this way, just so I know the route is just dealing with loading data. It's dealing with really management of stuff that happens in the model hook and related matters. It is not dealing with things like keyboard events and stuff like that. So once that logic dealing with receiving events gets to be a certain degree of complexity, to me it feels like that justifies creation of a controller. And it's like a tiny bit of code, and helps you stay organized So you have that nice separation of concerns. All right, so I will push this, and then we will begin the next section.
Hey, Mike, what is the difference between using the string in the debounce to define the function being fired instead of saying this dot debounce or this dot refresh route?
Really no
No
difference.
difference.
It's the same concept as like if you used set timeout or something like that. You know, if you there's really no difference. The thing you want to be careful of, and you will never get snagged if you do it the way I just approach it. The thing you want to be careful of is passing an anonymous function into debounce, because the only way that Ember can keep track of it needs to keep track of the fact that like this is you trying to do the same exact thing that you were trying to do 10 milliseconds ago. So I will now restart my timer. You know, subsequent calls to debounce will sort of reset the clock and start waiting from 0 again. If you pass an anonymous function in, that is a brand new function, and it's a totally separate timer, and so there's no way for it to sort out that this is exactly the same in the same place, you know, that you're trying to debounce previously. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So if you pass in
I've been bit by that before. Yeah.
if you're calling a function that is actually on that is owned by the object. In this case, we're calling a function on the controller here, right? We're calling this in. What we are not doing is this, which is bad. This here will get you into trouble, because although it may seem like you're debouncing refresh route here, what you're really debouncing is this anonymous function, and a new one is created every time you run this code. That is an anonymous function declaration, and it's brand new every time the action's called. So don't do it that way. If you get in the habit of doing like this and then the string name, this looks completely different. It feels wrong to pass a function of any kind in, and this kind of forces you to point to a long-lived named function, and so debounce will behave as you would expect in this context. So it's more like both work, but this is a way that I keep myself honest. You only have to run into like this bug a couple times before you just decide that like, it's worth it to pick this way and do it this way, and greatly reduce the chance that I will, you know, pwn myself.
Sure.